Hello and welcome to our Profiles in Power series, where we are highlighting Black educators across our county to celebrate their work, personal stories, and shining a light on the important work they are doing with in service of our students. My name is Valentin Escondido, Executive Leadership Coach with the Escondido County Office of Education's Equity Department. And today I have the privilege of interviewing an amazing local Black educator, Juel Copeland, who is a teacher at Orange Glen High School in Escondido. So welcome to today's episode, Juel.
Thank you so much, Valentin. I appreciate you.
So we're going to go ahead and get started and jump right in. So we're going to just tell us a little bit about your story. What's your story? What's your background? Tell us about your experiences.
Absolutely. Well, I am actually a Black and Mexican woman, and growing up biracial is a slew of other events and opportunities, and also elements that have shaped who I am. I'm also a military brat, so I did part of my education overseas and had that comparison as I returned to the United States with a mother who was Mexican and didn't speak English very well. And my mom didn't always feel welcome in schools. So she herself did not have a good experience in education. And then whenever she came to school for something for me, I could always feel her tension. And so one of the things that I try to do now that I'm a part of this educational system is to make all of my parents feel welcome all of the time and be really conscious of the fact that I don't know what their educational experience has been like, whether they ever felt welcomed in school and whether it is traumatic for them to be back on a campus. So that is just something that's in the back of my head. As a young girl, we moved around quite a bit because we were in the military. But things were not always good when I was at home. And there was always a teacher, no matter where we were stationed, who maybe didn't know what was going on because I had become highly skilled at hiding some of those things, but understood that I needed attention and always empowered me, always made me feel like I could do anything, make any friend, and just felt welcome in any environment. So I want to make sure that I provide that to our students as much as that I'm able to. Especially now in distance learning. They need to feel welcomed, they need to be heard, and they need to know that someone is caring about them. So every day when I get offline with them, as I'm leaving, I tell them, in case you haven't heard it today, I think you're amazing. I know that you're working really hard, and I want you to know that I'm here if you need anything. So I think more than anything, it's just about realizing that school isn't always someone's safe space, but it should be.
Thank you for sharing that and being vulnerable in that way. I really appreciate how you highlighted the fact that you understand your mom's experience and how that has really shaped how you interact with people and how you don't assume, right, the things that our students are going through. And so I also heard you say that being biracial. I had a conversation with a few educators that were multiracial. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I want you to maybe speak a little bit more about that. Like how did those experiences shape you into the educator that you are today?
I think more than an educator, it is shaped the mother that I am, the woman that I am, and then that trickles into my classroom because it's just pouring out of every facet of me, right? And being biracial, it is very common as I talk to people to not feel like you are fully immersed in either culture. So I actually spoke Spanish before I spoke English, but I don't look like I speak Spanish, right? So when we would go to Spanish mass, it didn't matter whether we'd been attending the same church for months. People always turned and watched as we came in to find our space, find our pew, right? That was always a thing. Within the Black community, there were always lots of questions, right? About my hair, about who was dropping me off at school, if that was really my mom, if that was really my cousin, right? There's just always this need to continually explain your identity. And as I became more comfortable with that, I realized that it wasn't the need to explain my identity, but it was the privilege of getting to explain my identity. And the reason I say that is because now as an educator, when I talk to my students about discrimination, when I talk to them about race relations, one of the things that they always say to me is that the first time they found out they were a different race, right? If they are not a white student, the first time that they found out that they were a different race is always in a negative context. And it shocked me, which is why I keep asking the question, because I'm waiting for someone to tell me something different. But every single time I ask this of my students, they found out that they were a different race because they were at school and only a certain group got pulled out for testing. Or they were in a store and someone said something to them and their mom said, well, that's how they treat us. Or they heard a word and they asked what that word meant and it turned out to be a derogatory term. So every time I hear my students talk about the first time that they knew what race they were or that they were a different race, like, right, that there was something that there was out there other than, it's always a negative connotation. So what I want to do with my own children, what I want to do in my classroom is I want to give them the privilege of explaining their identity, right? To take ownership of who that they are and to really celebrate that in their explanation. And I think that that more than anything is what I've brought into my classroom is the idea of voice, the idea of choice, but also that concept of ownership. So at Orange Glen High School, our slogan is, this is what a patriot looks like, because we're the Orange Glen Patriots. And I love the idea that we have reclaimed that identity because our school is over 90% free and reduced lunch. We're majority Hispanic. And so often when I'm teaching my AP US Government and Politics class, students don't identify as American citizens alone. They identify as a hyphen. And to have this emblazoned on our sweatshirts and in the classroom, like, this is what a patriot looks like. You are a patriot. You are a part of this culture in our campus and in our nation. And you have the privilege of speaking about who you are and what makes you you, I think is really powerful.
That is beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. When you think about yourself as an educator and navigating the educational system as a person of color, how has that experience been for you?
It's been an evolution. I think especially when I was a younger student, or I'm sorry, a younger teacher, I was always concerned about appearing to be the angry Black woman. And I would try and temper my emotions as a female, right, as a person of color. But I realized that certain people didn't have to do that. That while I was wary of being perceived in one way, other people could do it and just be passionate. And some of that was me, and some of that was the culture of the campus that I originally started on. So what I think is really important and what I think has changed over time with me in the setting and advocating for students is I can be impassioned, and I know that when I speak up for a student, it's because I would have wanted someone to speak up for me. I did want someone to speak up for me, and I really want someone to speak up for my own children. So I can't expect more of other people than I would expect of myself. And I'll tell you a story. When I was young and I first came back to California, I was at a soccer tournament and was with my travel team, and my mom couldn't be there that day. And one of the parents from an opposing team yelled, "Get that monkey off the field." And I waited for someone to respond. And nobody did. And this was a team that I had been playing with, that I had spent the night at someone's house, some of their houses. I had gotten a ride there with them. I was going to get a ride back with them. And not one of the parents said anything. And I ended up getting in trouble because then I did, and I got carded and I got removed from the tournament. And I don't think that we should ever put our students in a position where they are forced to solely advocate for themselves and then possibly get in trouble for advocating for themselves. So if it's a difference between a student being disciplined and me being passionate for them, and then providing a space for them to advocate for themselves with me next to them, then that's what I need to do. And so I think that that is where I am now, and that I've learned to ignore perception and remember that in this system, there are inequities. And in this system, it shouldn't be the exception for a student to be supported in a specific way. And until that is true, we need to work to change policy because policy is power frozen. So I shouldn't have to speak for an exceptional student, but I do until the policy shifts where everyone can use that same parameter to get the same opportunities. And I think that that's what's really, really important. So I speak because I always and I do, I think of that moment on that soccer field. I remember that feeling, and I remember looking around and going, really? Not one of you adults? I never want a student to be in a room looking at me like, really? You're not gonna speak for me? You who always talks about social justice, you? That's never gonna happen.
We had our equity conference, and we invited Dr. Monique Morris to speak at our conference. And one of the things that she said that really stuck out to all of us is this. She said, equity is about power and how we use it. And so what you just spoke to speaks directly to that quote. The power that we have as educators and adults in the system really speaks volumes to the things that we do for kids, or the things that we don't do for kids. Right. And so it's important for us to understand that the power that we hold as educators, whether we're a teacher or an administrator or district administrator, the decisions and actions that we have, there's some responsibility to the kind of outcomes that we're going to see from students. And so I'd like to ask you, if you could give yourself, your young educator self, some advice, what would it be?
If I were to give my young educator self advice, it would be to remind myself that all of the amazing lessons in the world and all those nights that I spent studying to make sure that I had exactly what I thought students needed was important, but was not nearly as important as the way the kids felt while they were learning. And I enjoy teaching, I enjoy children, and I hope that that always oozes out of me. But I know that I have been, I've gotten distracted early on in making sure that success looked a specific way. And it's not always test scores, but it helps, right? I like being able to say that I have an 80% pass rate last year on AP Gov and Politics, right? That makes me excited. But I got there because they enjoyed it, and because they were having fun with things, and because they were working with information meaningfully, and we were getting out into the community, and they were having experiences that helped solidify the information that I was trying to give them. So it wasn't about the perfect lesson, it was about the way, right? The way it was cemented. And that feeling, that getting out there, that something more was way more important than the perfect hook, was way more important than the perfect project. So if I were to give my younger self, my younger educator self, any bit of advice, it would be they'll learn when you love it as much as you do. And that's what's important.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. You take it, actually take us right into our next question. How valuable, when you talk about this importance of connection with kids, and importance of loving to learn, how valuable is it to have Black teachers, administrators, counselors, and support staff for our students?
Representation matters. Representation absolutely matters. And I can say this for every group and every demographic, right? It's important for young men to see men caring for them in a meaningful way. It's important for young girls to see women in power. It's important for our LGBTQI population to hear about and see LGBTQI people speaking about everyday things. When I first started when I first started advising the Gay Straight Alliance at my school, we would have mentors come in and work with students. And the first thing that a student said to me was, I didn't know that I could be anything other than a designer or a hairdresser. I thought that that was the only thing that was open to me as a gay person. And now I don't know why I didn't realize that it could be more. And it's because representation matters. And it changes things when I can be at my door and I can see a beautiful chocolate child walk in front of me and say, "Good morning, Queen." That's important. It's important for me to be able to speak to parents in Spanish and proudly identify as an Afro-Latina. It matters that students can see themselves in the curriculum, in the teachers that say that they care about them and then prove it each day, and in the way that you can empathize with the experience and open up questions in a way that they'll understand. Because when students connect with information, it's because they find that piece that makes sense to them. And I can do that, and sometimes in a way that I wouldn't have been able to without a shared background. So when we're doing World War I and I use Drake music, it works, right? And it's important. And again, I filter back and forth between education and being a parent. Miles Morales and the new Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse, right? Into the multiverse. It is a young Puerto Rican male. And my youngest son has this stuffed monkey. And my husband just finished 20 years of military service. And whenever my husband was deployed, my son wasn't sad, monkey was sad, right? My son wouldn't say that he missed daddy, but monkey missed daddy. And I remember watching Miles Morales, and he's speaking Spanish to his mom, and he's got obviously black hair, right? And my son looked at me and he said, "Mommy, he looks like me. That's me." And I'm like, "Yes, it is, baby." And before Black Panther, that wouldn't have been a possibility, right? But now he had it twice. And at the end, Miles Morales says, "I hope you now know that you can wear the mask too." It's right at the end of the movie. And my baby grabbed Monkey and spun him around and did like a flip, right? And then he looked Monkey in the face and he says, "You can wear the mask too." Representation matters. Children, babies, we all need to be able to see ourselves, not only to envision what we can be, but to envision past that. Because if this is possible, then everything else is possible too.
Absolutely. Snap, snaps to that. Snap, snaps to that. Which brings us to our final question. And so you have a rich history of creating inclusive environments, inclusive climates for students, giving them equitable access, a culture of excellence for your students within your classroom, and really focus on social justice. And so as you think about your vision of education as we continue to evolve our practices and systems and supports for all students, what do you see that looking like?
I think it's almost easy for me. Social studies is inherently social justice, right? So when you're looking at history, when you're looking at revolutions, too often we focus on the extraordinary, and really we need to focus on the everyday aspects of people and remember that history is just gossip with dead people, right? That's what it is. And when you look at things that way, you can find the story and you can find yourself in the story. When I think about social justice, though, it's reminding students that there are agents of change and that they themselves can be an agent of change. So every time we go through something in history, who is the change agent? Who did this? How did this start? What happened and what did this lead to? And I think that very often we're told that you should study history so that history doesn't repeat itself. That's not enough. You study history so you understand how something happened, why it happened, and then you can move forward in a meaningful and impactful way to actually move society and yourself forward. And when I think about inclusiveness, when I think about excellence, all children want to be believed in. And if you give them high rigor, you expect more of them, they will expect more of themselves. No student comes into a class and says, I want to fail. So if I come in and I say, you're not going to fail, and you are exceptional, and you are going to do this, and this is college level work, and we're still going to do it, and you just keep bringing them up, bringing them up, they know that you believe in them, they rise to the occasion, and then they want to be an agent of change as well. When I think of inclusiveness, when I think of equity, the only thing I can think of is that we need to be relentless in our pursuit of equity. We need to be relentless in our pursuit of excellence. We need to be relentless for our children. And that's all of them. Every single one of them is my baby. And that means if you fail, I'm failing. That means if you don't feel welcome in my classroom, I did something wrong. And at Equity Conference 2020, I heard Tim Wise speak, and I fangirled out, right? But he said, you don't do the right thing because people will follow you. You don't do the right thing because history will notice. You do the right thing because it's the right thing. So when we're relentless in pursuit of excellence, when relentless in making sure that our students have access to things that they wouldn't normally have access to, we're doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So if I get a grant and I'm able to take students to Hamilton, but not all the students are going to be able to afford lunch, then I'm going to go to the district and make sure that they pay for that extra item so that everyone can go. If we have the opportunity to see Secretary Robert Reich live and all of my students got tickets because I asked for them, great. But if that's open to other schools and those schools have cars for their students, right, that they all drive, so they're going to have 50 kids and I'm only going to have 8 because my students don't get a bus, I need the bus so I can have 50 kids there too. I don't care if it's the same. It's what my kids need to be able to have access to the opportunity. So I'm relentless, and I don't care anymore if that makes me annoying, if that makes me the angry person, because I'm going to come in and I'm going to passionately advocate. And in that same vein, we need to remember that our students, this is from Equity Conference 2020 as well, that our students don't need their trauma further punished. And so they come in, they have all of these experiences, they need the opportunity to speak on them, they need the opportunity to be empowered, and they need the opportunity to see themselves in what they're learning. And then they need to be taken to a new place, even if it's virtually, where they can apply that and expect more of themselves because you've already expected more of them.
Thank you for sharing that. Beautifully said once again. Juel Copeland, our inspirational teacher here on this episode of Profiles in Power. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your words and gracing us with the excellence that you expect in students, and you are doing what's right for students.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, Valentine. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here, Juel, and you know, we send you love and hugs your way as you continue to experience challenges with this pandemic and virtual environment, and still trying to figure out how to do what's best for students. But we hope that you join us next time as we continue to highlight educators here in this county that are doing some great work on behalf of students. Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Profiles in Power.